Today, I'm going to show you 3 pies that I make for every holiday season. These are the go-to pies that my family asks for, and I'll show you how to make a flaky, buttery homemade crust. Store-bought works as well. Here we go. Today, I'm going to be making a simple pie crust recipe that is buttery and flaky. And I am going to be using around 2 cups of all-purpose flour. To that, I'll add 1 teaspoon of salt and give that a good mix. By the way, check the description below because I actually think when making this crust, it's better to weigh your ingredients to get a more accurate recipe. But if you're not, those are approximate measurements. Okay, so now I'm adding around 7 tablespoons of butter flavored shortening. Now, some days I skip the shortening and use all butter. Here's another 7 tablespoons of unsalted butter, but like I said, it's up to you. In this pie crust, I used all butter. So use what works for you. Now I'm just going to use a dough cutter and just mix and combine my butter shortening into the flour mixture until it is nice and crumbly. And if you want to use a food processor, that works as well. So once this is a crumbly texture, I'm now going to add 7 tablespoons of iced water, and I mean ice cold. I do notice when working with pie crust, it's good to not overwork your dough and to use cold ingredients like the butter and the shortening and the water. Make sure it's nice and cold. So now I'm just going to use a butter knife to sort of work in the water. But like I said earlier, sometimes I use my food processor and I will mix it or work it until it starts to form a ball. Now that's when I'm using my food processor. As you can see here, it's starting to clump up, and that's a good indication that it's combined well. But when using my hands, I just sort of fold it and gently pat it into a ball. This recipe will make 2 9-inch pie crusts, and I like to just divide it beforehand and then create a disc and cover it in cling wrap. And then I'm going to refrigerate it for 1 hour. So today I'm going to be making a pecan pie, and here I have a 9-inch pie plate or pie dish. So here's my chilled pie dough. And typically when I'm at home, I like to use a silicone mat, and I like to add just a little sprinkling of flour when I'm rolling it out. But today I'm at a friend's house. I didn't bring my silicone mat, so I'm just going to use this cling wrap and just flour it. And I'm just going to dust lightly with flour. You don't want to work in too much flour into your pie dough. And I totally forgot my rolling pin, so here I am going to use a roll of cling wrap, and it works. Do what you got to do to make it work. So I'm just going to roll out my pie dough until it reaches around 14 inches in diameter, at least maybe with a 2-inch overhang from the pie plate. That may vary depending how thick you want your pie dough to be, but basically you do want to be able to cover your pie plate, set it in there, and fold a little bit around the edges. So now that my pie dough is rolled out, now I'm just going to lift it from the counter carefully. This dough is tender, and even though it's cold, once you start rolling it out and working with your hands, it does warm up a bit, but I'm going to carefully and gently flip it onto my pie plate. And because I'm using the cling wrap, it should be easy to peel away. You could also use parchment paper. That is another option to help you flip it out onto your pie dish and not have a mess, because it does get sticky the more you work with it. It kind of gets tacky when it warms up. So now all I'm going to do is just adjust the pie dough into the plate. And I don't like to trim any extra overhang. I just like to fold it in. We love the crust, but you can definitely do what works for you. I just sort of flip it in there and make it look rustic is basically what I'm doing. Okay, so now that I have fixed the edges to this pie dough, I'm going to chill it in the refrigerator for about 20 minutes, and today I'm using it for a pecan pie. Now, Another thing to ensure a flaky pie crust is to make sure that it's cold. So once you handle it and work with it, make sure you chill it again before baking. For the filling, I'm going to start by using 1 1/4 cup of dark brown sugar, and I packed the cups as I measured it, 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I'm going to give that a mix and combine well. Now I'm going to add 3 large room temperature eggs, 1/3 cup of evaporated milk, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 1/4 cup of melted unsalted butter. Here I'm adding 1 cup of corn syrup. This is a light corn syrup. Now I'm going to give that a really good mix, and I'm going to whisk and mix until it is combined and pale in color. Now that that is combined, I'm going to add 10 ounces of pecan halves. You can chop them and then just have the halves on top. You can arrange it into a pattern. That also looks nice for the holidays, but I'm just going to give it all a mix. So here I've removed my pie shell. It has rested and cooled in the refrigerator for about an hour or so. You want to work with a cold crust. That will help to make it flaky. Now I'm going to pour the filling into the pie crust. And I want to mention, I love to make my holiday pies the night before, especially pecan pie. You want it to set before you cut into it the next day. And just doing it the night before is so convenient, and it works for pecan pie. So I'm going to be baking this in a preheated oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for about 60 to 70 minutes. And the crust does not need to be covered, but if you find that the crust is getting too dark or deep brown, you can protect the crust by just adding a pie crust cover or aluminum foil. So once this is done, you'll want to let it set for a good while. So once your pecan pie has set, you can slice into it, and it truly is one of my favorite holiday pies to make. I could make this year round, but it's special for the holidays, and my family loves it. Today I'm going to be making a wonderful Dutch apple pie with a golden brown crumb topping that's easy to make. To get started, I've already peeled around 6 to 8 Granny Smith apples. Basically, I use 2 pounds of apples, and I'm thinly slicing them, removing all the apple slices from the core. I've added all of my sliced apples to a large bowl. Now I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon or a pinch of salt. I'm also going to be adding 1/3 cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour, a 1/2 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, 1 tablespoon of freshly squeezed lemon juice, and teaspoons of vanilla extract. Now I'm just going to combine and mix well. After combining the ingredients, I'm going to set it aside. Now I'm going to work on the crumb topping. To a bowl, I'm going to add 1 cup of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a cup of light brown sugar, and that is a packed cup. I'm going to give that a mix. And I'm going to be working with salted or sea salted butter, but if you're using unsalted, just add a pinch of salt to it. But since I already have salt in the butter, I'm not going to add salt. So now I'm just going to use a dough cutter and just cut this in until it is a crumbly texture. Once everything is combined and crumbly, I'm going to start putting this pie together. I'm working with a 9-inch store-bought crust. This is an unbaked crust. If you want a homemade crust recipe, I will link my buttery, flaky pie crust recipe in the description below. I'm going to add all of my dressed apples and just give it a nice pat on top just to make sure nothing falls out. Now I'm going to top it with the entire bowl of crumb topping. I'm going to place my pie on a baking sheet just so nothing spills out of the pie onto my oven, and I'm going to be baking this in a preheated oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 50 minutes. And then I'm going to remove it from the oven and allow it to set for about an hour, and then I'm ready to serve. Whether it's fall baking, holiday baking, or just a Dutch apple pie kind of day, I make this pie year-round, and my family loves it. Okay, to start making this easy pumpkin pie recipe, I'm starting with 15 ounces of pumpkin puree. I'm using canned pumpkin puree for this today, which is another reason why it's so easy. I'm going to add 2 large eggs, 1 14-ounce can of sweetened condensed milk, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon and a half of pumpkin pie spice, and give it a mix. If you do not have the pumpkin pie spice mix, you can use 1 teaspoon of ground cinnamon, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground nutmeg, and a 1/4 teaspoon of ginger. You could adjust the ratios to that. So this is mixed well. I'm going to set aside and show you what I do with this pie shell. So I am already baking a pie in the oven, and I just use the pie shell from the store. But this one is kind of broken, so I thawed it, and I'm going to basically put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I'm going to press it into my pie plate. And once it's all back together, I'm going to put it in the freezer for about 15 to 20 minutes. You want to work with a very cold or frozen pie shell. So now that it's cold and frozen, I'm going to add my pumpkin pie mix into the pie shell. And I'm baking this in a preheated oven for 15 minutes only at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. After 15 minutes, I'm going to drop the temperature to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and continue cooking for another 35 to 40 minutes. And here's the one I just put in, but the second one is almost done, and it looks like this. And I left that in the pie shell that came from the store. But once it's done, you'll want to let your pumpkin pies set for at least 1 to 2 hours. This is great to do the night before. And take a look at that crust. It did break. It's okay. It's going to taste good. And here is the second pumpkin pie. You can garnish with what you like. Whipped cream is popular, and it tastes great. I hope you give this recipe a try. I hope you like it, and thanks for watching.